I see that the polarization that we're caught in as a country right now is dangerous and frightening and harmful, and I want to be part of helping us figure out a way out of that.
What if the key to transformation lies in shifting your perspective? Hi, I'm Dr. Payal Beri. Welcome to Reframing Perspectives. Every conversation here is about one thing: how empathy changes the way we lead, connect, and create impact. Each episode, we get to explore deep, authentic conversations designed to expand your mindset. Whether you're looking to transform your leadership, deepen your relationships within your circle, your community, and friends, or gain clarity in your own personal growth, each episode will inspire you to see things differently and take action. If you're ready to challenge your thinking and embrace transformation, you're in the right place. Let's dive in. If you want somebody in your life where at every moment when you have questions, when you just want to talk about something, and they just leave you with those jaw-dropping aha moments, light bulbs going off, just like, oh my God, how did I not think of that? Like, wow, that was, yes, absolutely. Like, it literally just stops you in your tracks. That is Kai Stowers, my friends. Kai is this transformative human, this person who truly understands the intentional growth and healing and the embodiment of that. As we like to say, hashtag Kai speaks, because when Kai speaks, things are just put into a context that you would have never otherwise thought about. As a white, queer, transgender man, Kai brings a very unique perspective on gender dynamics and bias to his work, which is truly informed by his own personal journey and identity. And this is someone who began his career as a chemist, who was way more interested in being in the lab doing cool science stuff than all the warm and fuzzy topics like leadership and culture and teaming. But after working in so many different environments and his own personal understanding of that human experience, it ultimately led him in this direction. But what you're going to get out of this episode today is truly about understanding what it means to be a scapegoat, what it means to be in a unique perspective that we don't necessarily hear from all the time, but from such a compassionate place. So just get ready for a lot of hashtag Kai Speaks mic drop moments.
Hello, Kai Speaks.
Hi, Payal. It's so good to be on the podcast with you.
So great to see you. I'm going to keep saying Kai Speaks until Kai Speaks comes out.
I was actually doing some planning for that this morning. It's almost as if I knew there was going to be some accountability when I got on the call with you.
So for all the listeners out there, we met just this like May, and
yeah,
every single thing that you say is like a mic drop. So it's like, how do you not have like your own like Dear Kai column, and it's called hashtag Kai Speaks, and everyone needs to be like sending Kai all of your challenges, and well, not all, because we don't want you to get burnt out, but like it's like, because what you speak is just, there's so much wisdom and there's so much thoughtfulness and kindness, and obviously comes from like your own personal experiences, but also comes from your knowledge, your expertise, and people need Kai in their lives.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
This is coming from someone who needs Kai in my life. So we talk often, and I love our conversations because we talk about such serious stuff, but there's so much laughter in it because it's like, what else can you do?
Yeah, if you can't hold these things lightly, right?
No, like the world's on fire. Let's laugh. Like, come on. Here's my like little sprinkles of water towards it. Hopefully die it down. Anyways, so we talk a lot about double standards and just this idea, and I think that like right now with the state of the world that we're in, and with the state of the world, to be honest, that the world has always been as long as humans have been around.
Right.
And I think that's really important to say, is that there is this double standard that happens where we're so quick to have a lot of empathy and compassion for our own group, and what happens to our family, what happens to our community. But the minute it goes to the same exact things are happening to a different community, it's like we can shut that feeling off, and now it becomes this abstract thing, or it becomes so objective, and it's just like, well, that's different.
Right. Right. Have you seen those people? What were they really up to? Maybe they had it
Yeah.
coming. Like, yeah, the amount of stories we have around that is incredible.
What do you think it is? So I'm going to share a story with you that I recently heard, and it's so wild to me. This was on a news channel, and they were doing a story about this one. It was actually a Mexican family. They live in New Mexico or Texas, one of those places. I'm not forgetting the exact details,
You know
but
they're not the same, right?
yeah,
As a former Texan, I just have to point that out.
yes, I do recognize that.
But
But
anyway,
they were somewhere over there. I'm not remembering that exact
yeah.
detail, but that's the only detail I do not remember. So they've been here for about 30-ish years. Their kids are here, they're citizens, everything. But they did come across illegally
Yeah.
initially. They got their citizenship, everything's great. Now, they were being interviewed because they don't agree with undocumented immigrants coming
Mm,
over and getting citizenship. And
right.
it's like, okay, but that's what you did.
Right.
And they're like, no, but now it's different. Now the people
Mm,
who are coming are criminals. That wasn't us.
oh,
We weren't. Me, and my husband were not. But
yeah.
these ones are.
Right. Right.
So that's not even someone else's community. That is within your own and doing the exact same thing that you did. And
Yeah.
now there's this reaction to now we're othering.
Yeah. Yeah. And I kind of see that in my own community too. So I am queer and trans. Um, and it's like, how do we distance ourselves from the unacceptable parts of ourselves or our communities and like align with like the right way to do something? Like that, like in response to a threat of, oh, if all I'm hearing about this community is they're dangerous or they're murderers or, whatever horrible thing that they're getting scapegoated for, I think it's really natural to look at that and be like, well, I'm not that. And let me put as much distance between me and that stereotype as I possibly can.
Yeah.
So in my community, it's the form of, oh, well, here are the ways I fit in with, straight culture. Like I'm married,
Right.
I have kids, we don't fit these stereotypes of what flamboyant like queer person might look like. That look, I've got my suit on. And so there's lots of, and sometimes that's just who someone is. Sometimes someone's just really straight laced, right?
Right.
But it can be a way of distancing ourselves from the parts of ourselves in our community that feel that they're not accepted.
Yeah. There's so much rejection there.
Yeah.
That happens, even within the South Asian, like you see so many people that like reject their own culture because, growing up in the 80s and 90s here, it's like, oh, you smell like curry or,
Right.
your names are so different, like, can't pronounce them. And so there's like hatred around that or, there's such a deep seek and need for being validated.
And sometimes it's not just, it's safety too. It's survival too.
Yeah. What
And
is that? Like, I mean, when you think about for yourself in your life
yeah.
and, the choices that you've had to make where you, like you said, right, you grew up in Texas, like, Texas.
Yeah.
And, there is such a strong culture of a Texan culture.
Right.
And what was it like for you to be able to, you grow up in a home where it's like protect the family name, all these things. And then you're like, oh, I'm a little different.
Right. I remember being in high school, realizing that I wasn't straight and I was in the cafeteria and like looking around going like, I can't deal with this right now. Like, I'm not going to make it through high school if I acknowledge this to myself, much less anybody else. And so, I stayed in the closet. So I came out as queer when I was in college. I didn't come out as trans until only 6 years ago. And a lot of that was for survival. It's like, because I was working in biotech and pharma, which, it's a more conservative field. And I think it would have been challenging to navigate and keep a successful career in that while being a trans person, because I didn't know anybody else who was trans. Like, I'm sure there were trans people, but they weren't out to me, at least.
You didn't know anybody in the workplace
In the
or
workplace, yeah. And I
okay.
knew some people in my social circles who were trans, but I knew them after they transitioned, so I was just kind of reading them as their new gender. It didn't really, like, I hadn't seen anybody
go through the process.
transition and be supported and, have a good career and all of those things.
Yeah. How do you help people understand you who just, and I hate this, right? It's like, I hate the fact that it falls on the one who's had to go through the path of like challenges or I always call it like the off-roading space
Hmm.
to be now the ones who have to like help others understand. But it's like, how can others be more empathetic and be more understanding of an experience that's different than them?
Yeah. And I'll take the example of transitioning or coming out because those are ones I've, lived through and can speak to. But all of us change and evolve over time. And if I ask people to think back to, what's a time where you changed who you were, and maybe it was, you changed a job, or maybe you got married or divorced, likely there were people who came along with you in the journey who were there for you before and they were there for you after. But a lot of times when we go through a big change, not everybody can come with us because, like, we like that old version of you.
Hmm.
And this new version, we're really not sure about at best. And I think that's something more universal that people can start to relate to. I ask sometimes people to look at their own experiences of, when they've been othered or left out or misunderstood because there's a story about people like them, right? A lot of times building empathy for others means that we need to be able to touch into our own experiences about belonging and not belonging
Yeah.
before we can step into someone else's shoes.
I always say that, when someone is feeling really uncomfortable with your story or whoever's story or their experience is because they haven't necessarily fully understood their own experience yet.
Yeah.
They've like either rejected it or they've, haven't even approached going there because it's just they're just kind of going through the motions of life.
Yeah.
And so it's hard for them to then so their response is often like we say this, and I do hate it sometimes where when people kind of go from a place of like, well, your response is just a projection of yourself, right? And it's like,
I mean,
yes,
it's sure. And is that always helpful?
exactly,
Like, if I'm really worked up about someone and you just tell me I'm projecting, this conversation's not going to go well, especially if it's true.
right. And it's that, and it's also that like sometimes it's not a projection.
Right.
Sometimes
Yeah.
it is actually like, no, your response is something that is like a true belief of like, this community, this group, whatever it is, or it's like, and it's really interesting, like how people then just completely dismiss what's going on.
Yeah. Can you say more, like, when you say completely dismiss
Yeah.
what's going on?
So I guess it's just that, when they haven't necessarily come to terms with like their own story, their
Right.
own understanding of like their background, they haven't like fully understood that, or like they just don't care to because they're just like, no, like, what do you mean? Like, I don't belong. Like, I'm just going through the motions. Or like when things happen, like, whatever, just like push it off when, so it's like they don't see it as a projection of their
Right.
issues or their discomfort because they haven't even thought that they have discomfort with it.
Right.
You
Right.
know what I mean?
Right.
Like, it's just this idea that when you get someone who's like very straight laced and just someone who's just like going through the life, and so they don't think that they've actually had any hurdles.
Right.
They don't think that they've had any challenges, any hurdles, or anything like that. So then when you're asking them to like relate to a moment, they're like, well, that's just life. That's just, that's just, you go through these motions. It's
Yeah.
okay.
Well, I wonder though if that's someone that hasn't experienced any hurdles, because a lot of people, when
Yeah.
you ask them about this, they're like, "Yeah, I mean, I've had all kinds of challenges, but that's just life. So I moved on.
Right.
Like,
Yeah.
why are other
Right.
people talking about it?"
Yeah. Like it just feels that's what I mean. It's just like
Yeah.
there's so much of this, like, that's just life. Like you just grow thick skin.
Right. Right.
Right. And so,
And I mean, I grew up in that culture. I had to do a
yeah.
lot of unpacking of like everybody's life is hard. You're nobody special. We can also think about what generation I am to have heard
Yeah.
that message. And it was a long time before I even understood what the value of actually sitting with my feelings and recognizing the ways I had been harmed was really important for healing. Because I'd been taught that was just self-indulgent. And, the problem was my feelings. And the thing was just to, get back on the horse and do the thing.
Right.
And sure, I could do that. But then I had all of these unprocessed emotions that were coming out sideways.
How do you, when going back to the idea of getting someone who, for example, like feels deeply about what has happened in their own community of, they've been ignored, they've been betrayed, they've been, victimized, like whatever it is, right? I mean, we can name so many things. Like there have been so many different types of genocides that have happened in this world, right? But what is it that makes one genocide more important than another one?
Right. I've been thinking about this lately, and we'll take two examples of there's Gaza and Ukraine,
Right.
right? And Gaza, I'm able to say this is terrible, right? But it's at a head level.
Yeah.
And then when Russia invaded Ukraine, like I felt that in my body, and I
Mm,
was like why am I having such different reactions to these? And I realized that my ancestry is not from Ukraine, but it's from Eastern Europe.
hmm
And there's reasons why a land war in Europe, like, we know our DNA like 7 generations back, right?
Right.
Right? And I don't have ancestry in the Middle East.
hmm
So that's one of my theories. And I think,
Wow, that's powerful. So you're saying that because we have 7 generations of DNA that's in us that remembers the experiences, it's literally being activated.
right, right, because I'm in community with someone whose ancestry is from the Middle East. And their react, like we had different reactions to the two. Like they had space around Ukraine, and we've been learning from each other in this. And I want to give a shout out to Resma Menakem and his book My Grandmother's Hands. If you're interested in this topic of like somatics and what's in our body at all, like that's a great resource. But then we look at what gets reported on, and what is the ancestry of reporters in the United States overall, like
Yeah.
who are elected officials, like, and if you start to like look at like the bigger patterns, like this starts to make more sense to me on why
Yeah.
some genocides matter in the US, right? And some genocides don't.
Yeah. Wow. I didn't even think about that from a DNA perspective and, what that does to us, but that makes a lot of sense. And, of course, there's so many other factors also about why
Right, right, right. Yes,
European genocides matter and Middle
yes.
Eastern don't. And same thing, right? Like I didn't grow up, like I'm South Asian. I'm not from the Middle East area, but I grew up in the Middle East
Yeah,
prior to moving to the US. So I grew up in Egypt, I grew up in Dubai, I grew up in Iraq. And so that felt very painful and strong. And I'm trying to think back now, like when Ukraine Russia thing, I mean, I definitely still felt it, but
right.
I definitely do feel this more.
Yeah,
But here's the difference, right? You're still able, you're not minimizing that it is a genocide,
right,
right? I think that's the piece though, is that there are communities that just don't even want to call it that,
right,
but
right.
they will for if it happens to their community.
Yeah,
How do we get people to actually see that no, 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 what's happened here and what's happened here is the same.
yeah,
It's a similar pain. It's a similar uh, travesty. It's a similar, you know, trauma that's being
yeah.
experienced by these groups.
I think people need space to process their own whatever it is first. So I'm thinking of another friend I'm in community with who is Jewish, and we've had many conversations, and she really needed someone to acknowledge first all of the anti-Semitism and the harm that was done by Hamas
Mhm.
to Israelis. Like she needed a lot of space around that before she could like start to let somebody else's experience in. Because when there's this amount of violence, sometimes we do have to put on our own oxygen mask first
Yeah.
so that we can keep breathing long enough to hopefully be able to hold someone else's experience too.
Yeah, that's absolutely fair. It's like when we haven't had a moment to even process what's going on. How am I responding to this? How am I responding to what's happening around me? Processing that while you're still just trying to live your day to day life.
Right, right.
Right? And all the guilt that comes with that and all the grief that comes with that. And then we're surrounded where we're constantly getting this information. Everyone's having an opinion about it. And now we're having to formulate and process
And
before we're ready.
oh, and by the way, we all want everybody to have the right answer immediately.
And the right answer meaning
My
agree with
answer.
me.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And so here we are, super activated by, our own past traumas, the traumas that are currently unfolding before us. And, you can go online anywhere and see a really unnuanced conversation about here's the right way and the wrong way, and you're either with me or you're against me, right? This is the definition of polarization. Like, we can't think when we're polarized. We tend to just escalate because we feel like we are experiencing our lives as in danger.
Yeah. Yeah. There's a literal crisis freeze reaction happening in your body
Right.
that is preventing you from, you're in survival mode.
Right.
And when you're in survival mode, there is no space for anybody else. Like
Right.
it's basic human biology.
Right. Right. And this is part of the reason our species is still alive,
Yeah.
right? And it can also be counterproductive, especially
Yeah.
if we...
Species, yes, we can.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I'll say this, that I think personally, the only time that we will resolve any of these issues is when the human species has gone extinct.
I see a fellow optimist.
I'm the eternal optimist.
Yes.
But no, really, it's just, so, and then we break this down, right? So we're talking genocide, obviously feels very big. Now let's bring it down to like our day to day.
Yeah.
And, just with your neighbors, with, the way that we look at the experiences that we have in a very multicultural, multi-ethnic, multi-religious, multi-everything mosh pit. Like, I mean, that is
Right.
the one thing I will say is that when we do look at across the world, right, we have very homogenous groups. So when a lot of times people will compare, like, look at the Scandinavian countries and look at their
Right.
happiness, look at this and look at that and look what they
Right.
do. But it's like, but they actually have a very
Mm-hmm.
homogenous group, and
Yeah.
their population is like 2% of ours.
Right. Right.
And, America like really is one of the only places that it was built on immigration.
Yeah.
And well,
also genocide, to go
right.
back to your original topic. Yes.
Genocide, right. Genocide, and then colonization, and then immigration, and
Right.
all these things. This is, in a way, it's like the United States is like, yeah, the land of opportunities, but the land of like refuge.
Yeah.
For different communities that were coming here for better opportunities. Like when you think about, why is it someone came who would leave their own country, right, where there were generations of living, and they're like,
Yeah.
I want to go here. It's like there's this idea of hope.
Right.
This idea of a peaceful life, or
Mm-hmm.
whatever it is, right? So whether you're escaping opportunities because of poverty, of violence,
Right.
of persecution, of, religion, or whatever it may be, gender, right?
Mm-hmm.
Then you're coming to this country for that. But now there's such a mix, and now you have these various cultural differences, and
Yeah.
everyone living in a certain way, but yet we want to try to consolidate this into the American
Right.
way.
Right.
So
Right.
this is just my ADD brain going everywhere, but it's just, it really, and like, hopefully you're following, but it's like, we're in this space where now people have, if we just took a moment and looked at the fact that anyone who came to this country and has been here for, whether it's a couple generations or not, it's like you came here for a similar reason.
Yeah. Right. And so, when we're polarized, the move is to find some common ground.
Right.
Right. To remember, hey, we, most of us, I mean, there's people who have been here all along.
Right.
Most of us came to this country, or our ancestors came to this country. Some were brought against their will, but most of us came for opportunity.
Right.
Right. Like, can we remember that? Can we access that even when our identities are under pressure? Because I think of the example you opened with, the Mexican family who came here illegally, mm-hmm. and now it's like, well, no, we don't support. Like, I mean, the pressure is, people like them are being told that they are
right.
terrible people, right? And
mm-hmm.
so that pressure is, rather than find their relief valve, it sounds like, is mm-hmm. instead of finding common ground, to say, yeah. Oh, no, I'm not like them.
Right.
If that's what those people are like, I'm not like that.
Yeah.
And I think it's a harder move when we are seeing a group that's being scapegoated or blamed some way. And this is another thing that humans just do, and will continue to do until we're extinct, is like, there's that scapegoating. We're going to put everything we don't like about ourselves and society on this person, this group.
Yeah.
and then and then we don't have to deal with it in ourselves.
Yeah. And it's so interesting that you bring up that point about like, the othering and just like, oh, we don't want to associate with that. And you also look at like, just even if we take it back to history, right? So, like, for example, what's really fascinating and interesting is that even within the South Asian community, we were colonized by the British for, well over 200 years.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of that needing to feel more closeness to whiteness to
Right.
feel validated,
Yeah.
right? And that comes in so many different things like bleaching your face to get lighter skin,
Yeah.
beauty and the way beauty is like seen. But the other piece is, which is a little even deeper, is there is such a strong response for, in terms of not accepting of the LGBTQ community or
Yeah.
trans community.
Yeah.
But which I find really fascinating because if you actually take true, like, Hindu culture and all the way back, it's written in the scriptures. It's
Mm.
written like, in fact, like we have what we call, the trans communities, like, and the our Hijras.
Yeah.
And Hijras in India were actually known as some of the best spies and some of the best investigators for the royals. So the
Mm.
kings depended on them deeply.
Yeah.
And even today, right? Even today, when there is a birth happening, when there's anything of positivity happening, people actually want the hijras to come to bless them.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a big part of that, right? It's a big part of actually the Indian culture in India. And, they come and they sing songs and they bless the kid and the baby and everything. So I find it really interesting when it's like, this has actually they've been a big part of our community and our society and culture from the beginning. We have celebrated them, in a way of like actually being inclusive. Like, of course, there were still challenges and they are, but this idea of rejection isn't actually true to our culture.
Right.
It was something that was put on us,
Yeah.
right? And so then we, over the course of 200 years, have now seen it as this isn't part of our South Asian culture. What was interesting is that actually this is maybe a year ago or so, Starbucks did a really, really powerful commercial in India where it was the parents were coming to Starbucks, they were sitting down and they were like patiently waiting for their kid to come in.
Yeah.
And, they're waiting and they're mentioning the kid's name and the kid walks in and what you end up realizing is that the kid had transitioned and was a transgender kid. And so the father was the one who was having a really hard time with
Mm-hmm.
this. So as soon as the kid sits down, the father gets up. And so you're seeming to think that the father is like, I can't do this,
Right.
right?
Right.
But went and actually got coffees for all of them with the new name
Mm.
that
Yeah.
the transition kid has, and shows this like love like between them, right? That we accept you no matter what, right?
Yeah.
It caused a massive uproar and protesting in India saying that don't bring your westernized culture to us. Like this
Right.
is your westernized way of thinking. But it's like, no, actually, what you've taken on is the westernized thinking.
Yeah.
It's not what the culture truly actually experienced prior to the colonized cultural influences.
Right. And maybe I'll speak to like, the white colonizer part of this
Yeah.
equation too, which is a lot of times we don't know that history either. And then we look at, other regions of the world and say, oh, well, they're not nearly as good with LGBTQ rights as we are. Right.
Yeah.
Because like that history is there. But I mean, we have such short-term memory of what our
Shorter.
history is. Right? And then I also think of, what everyone has had to do to survive in this world, right? And that's like the more immediate thing that's passed down to us. We might not remember our history, but we certainly remember what gets us killed or not, or what lets us access, money and power and influence.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah. And that's where I think we get so caught up in the propaganda
Yeah.
of things and we forget that to connect on the human level.
Right.
So how do you get someone who is feeling the same pain you're feeling, but they're so committed to saying, no, but it's different.
So it depends. So here's one of my chiasms that I got from one of my mentors, which is like there's a set of 3 questions. What is your goal? What is your role? And what can you do without losing your soul?
Kai speaks.
And, sometimes if someone's really committed to not understanding and not being open, like protect your peace. Like you are not going to reach everybody. That is not your job to reach everybody. If the relationship is important for some reason, or like me, like this is often part of my job is to, help individuals and groups like see each other better and, figure out better ways of working together. It's not going to happen overnight. Like sometimes you need to nibble rather than gorge. People need to feel heard before they can hear anybody else.
Yeah. What is it that's preventing people from feeling heard, feeling seen right now?
How long do we have? So I'll go with one answer, which is I think everyone has experiences with trying to share something really vulnerable and it getting shut down or used against them or them being shamed in some way. And we remember that. Like that forms a big impression on us. And it makes us far more cautious going forward. And so when someone like you or we come in, we're working with a group and we're like, okay, well now it's safe to share. People are like, oh, really? Oh, really? I've heard that before. So depending on what people's individuals' histories are, depending on what their history in that group or that organization is, they might be accurate in saying that, until we've built a lot more trust, I'm not going there.
Yeah. I mean, so how do you help the people that you work with and the teams that you support? How do you help them get there?
Yeah. So there's different parts. Some of it's just like, how do I regulate myself, my emotions, my body, so that when things get hard, it's not as overwhelming.
Yeah.
Part of it is we try to talk about the dynamics that are happening on teams. Here's how the team at their best is likely to function. And, do we recognize that? Or under stress, here are the behaviors that likely come out. And some of the ones I like to talk about is like, it's like that flight, fight, or fawn response.
Yeah.
And if the team shares a response, then like that usually makes sense to everybody. But when the team has people with different strategies under stress, that can make it really hard. So if one person wants to fight it out and the other person wants to flee.
Oh, yeah. Right.
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 How
It's
do
like
you,
your body's communicating so differently.
right.
And they're not like you're having the same challenge,
Mm-hmm.
but it's manifesting differently.
Right.
And so now you're really not being able to connect.
Right. Right. Because I know, say my response is to flee. I'm like, well, I'm a reasonable person. So, it's reasonable to me that we would just try to avoid this conflict.
Yeah.
And someone whose response is fight, saying, well, I'm a reasonable person. And, what seems reasonable for me is to like, let's duke this out right now. So we're not walking on eggshells.
Right. Right.
And then we can really misattribute people's intentions. Oh, the kind of person who would fight is an, fill in the blank.
Yeah.
Right? They're aggressive, they're mean, they're dangerous. Or the kind of person who would avoid it, wow, they must be passive aggressive, they're kind of weak. Like we have all of the stories that we start putting on top of it. And then it gets even harder to talk to each other because now we're not talking to the person, we're talking to what we're imagining like the worst case version of this person to be.
Because you're already in crisis mode. And when you're in crisis mode and survival mode, your natural reaction is to think about worst case scenario and start protecting you from there because that's a threat.
Yeah.
And then now, and what's wild is that you're describing this, right? Well, I think what people don't realize is that this literally happens in a millisecond.
If that, I know, it's so fast.
You know what I mean? Like it's
so fast
that by the time you even catch up to it, you're already like severed relationship, or whatever's happened.
Yeah.
And or you're crying or you're, literally under a desk because you can't handle it, whatever's happening. But what you're describing is like this, like these patterns that happen in our bodies.
Right.
But because biologically, we have to like respond in a way where it's very quick. This is all happening under like a millisecond.
Yeah. And so knowing what those patterns are and being able to talk about it as a team are so helpful, because if you can predict what's going to happen, you can start to make plans of, okay, I know I just going to want to run out of the room. I can commit to being a little bit more uncomfortable and staying in this conversation a little bit longer if the other person can commit to slowing down a little bit and giving me more time and space to think about it.
Yeah. And the same thing applies to just like in your families, in your, your day to day, right? Like
Guess
this
where we
is
learn these things?
right. Soccer. I swear to God, all I like ask of is, can we just have emotional intelligence as a part of our core curriculum, or is that too controversial? Like,
Yeah. Yeah. When I saw the new Inside Out movie when it came out, and I was just like,
so brilliant.
oh, it was so great. And then part of me was just sad. I was like, oh my God, what would it have been like to like have this as things that I had access to growing up? I
So,
got Bambi.
so actually, it was so funny. There, I saw this TikTok where it literally was this guy, and he's like walking down the stairs. It's like has this text over thread, and it said, "So let me get this straight. When I was growing up, I had Disney movies that was like poisoning a princess. Like a man had to kiss her while she was unconscious to
Right.
wake up.
Right.
A evil mother was trying to kill her stepdaughter."
Yeah.
And was dealing with all of this, and then we had these beasts, whatever. Or we had an uncle who's trying to kill his nephew to overtake the throne. But this generation gets Inside Out. Like,
Right. Right.
yeah,
Yeah.
it really is. It's like, yeah, like I have two nieces, and when I try to talk to them about things, sometimes like I'll actually use Inside Out as like, hey, yeah, so remember when like disgusted this,
Yeah.
right? And like
Yeah.
when anger was this, or when anxiety came up, like, and sometimes with my niece who's a little bit like on the old, like to teenage years, and so I'll be like, so what level anxiety are you today versus disgust today versus, just
Yeah.
kind of get
Yeah.
an idea
Yeah.
of what
Yeah.
we're doing with right now.
Right.
But yeah, it's just like, and it also makes it safe to use these languages of, now it's not about like, hey, so you're being really anxious, so like I don't know if I can go there, versus just being like, hey, so those characters of Inside Out, like where are you on the spectrum
Right.
right now of that, right? Like
Right.
it adds a little bit of that like safety feeling to be
Mm-hmm.
able to put it on something else
Yeah. Yeah.
and associate with it.
Yeah. And to have some positive associations. I mean, I think all of
Yeah.
the emotions, like, you know, we all have our favorites and we all have the ones we don't like as much. But like there's something good and endearing about all of the emotions,
Yeah.
which is very different than when I grew up, and like I think compliance was a good emotion. It's not even an emotion, but that was a good thing.
Right.
um,
Right. And there's so much that we'll talk about compliance, right? Like, again, going back to this idea of like, how do we get to groups who may be experiencing the same thing to feel for each other and
yeah.
to accept that like both of our realities can exist and it's okay.
Yeah, I think there needs to be a goal on like, why is this even important to you? Because if I go
Yeah.
into a group and they're like, oh, we think we should because, we're good people, I'm like, that's probably not actionable enough of a goal. Can you tie it to your business, your outcomes, your values? Then when the going gets tough, because it's going to, we have something to anchor to of, yeah, this feels really hard right now, but this work feels important because you wanted to see XYZ change in the world.
Right.
Right. Or, you can think of, I have a good friend or a family member who's part of this group and I want them to have a better life.
Yeah. Yeah.
Or I might not know anyone from that group, but I see that the polarization that we're caught in as a country right now is dangerous and frightening and harmful. And I want to be part of helping us figure out a way out of that. And like you said at the beginning, it might be just throwing a few drops of water at the fire.
Yeah.
But that is, so, I mean, sure, if we can't put the giant fire out, that's one thing. But to at least have some oxygen and help people ground and remember that something else is possible.
Right.
That's going to be our path forward. If we don't even think it's possible, why even try?
Right. Yeah. But if there is one thing that you feel from your personal experience, from, moving through working with leaders and everything that you've gone through, if there's one step
Yeah.
that someone can take towards shifting it from you versus me to you and me,
Yeah.
what would that be?
Oh, that's a great question. I mean, just the fact that someone can ask that question,
Yeah.
I think right there is huge. Because again, when we're in that polarized, fight, flight, freeze, fawn, the idea of there's a you and me is just gone. So
Yeah.
having some ability to settle the body, some ability to regulate, not control the emotions,
Yeah.
to reconnect with our value of we are in this together, like just remembering that and settling the body enough so that then we can access all of the other skills and capacities that we might have.
Yeah. No, and there's to your earlier point, like I think there's so much compassion that we need to really build in
Mm-hmm.
first before we can even step into the world of empathy.
Right.
We really need to like be able to understand ourselves and where is this coming from and why am I getting so upset about this? Like,
Yeah.
I think sometimes we don't even ask ourselves, like, why am I so worked up
Yeah.
about this?
And not like in an interrogation where we throw ourselves up
Right.
against a wall and like,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
but it's like the fact is we are upset, and some understanding around that can go a long way.
Yeah. And I think that, the other piece is like this identity thing, right? Like it's like we hold on to this identity for dear life. Or like if we're rule abiders, like it's
Mm-hmm.
like, how could you do something so different? Like, aren't you like you're not following the path that's supposed to be for us? Like, why
Right.
would you do this to yourself? And the pain that comes from like, your life is going to be so much harder because you're not following the path. Just do what you're supposed to do.
Right. And who made the rules?
Yeah.
Like, who are the rules for? I mean,
Yeah.
that's a question I ask as an LGBTQ person because the rules were not made by or for us.
No.
And I think there's not an understanding of how high the cost is for us to try to be something that we are not and just can't be.
Yeah.
And so having some space around, what are the rules? What are the norms in our community? What is our culture? Like, know that, value the parts that you appreciate and have shaped you in a good way. And can you bring some complexity in to say, this part of my culture has been really helpful for me, but I can see how it's not as helpful for you.
Yeah, that's really powerful. It's like just being able to acknowledge that narrative, right? That I recognize how this has benefited me.
Right.
And I recognize that that has, because and it's true, right? Like to get one benefit, you have to have something that's sacrificed.
Right.
And so like who is the sacrificial lamb
Yeah.
here? Or who is the where is that even coming from? And so it's just that idea of no one's asking you to feel guilty, to feel ashamed of,
Right.
or anything that there has been this benefit. It's just recognizing that it just exists.
Yeah. As Brene Brown says, shame is a terrible teacher.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
What is it that you look forward to, like as you're doing this work, with your teams or in your personal life, even? What is something that you feel like if I'm going to bring people together and to be able to depolarize and for people to be able to even understand my community.
Right.
Um, and I think sometimes that it's not just about like, like we're talking about like to break it down more for people,
Yeah.
right? Is like when we talk in big conceptual ideas and concepts, like it just goes over our heads.
Yeah.
And then it just feels like, well, that's just too, like you're trying to tell something too big. But when we do something where it's more with, okay, let's just talk about simple things like getting a job and how that can be difficult for someone who doesn't belong to the group that benefits, or recognizing getting married, recognizing benefits for, hey, by the way, when you have a medical procedure and when there's a surgery happening, and if something happens to you, who gets to be called a caretaker, guardian, who gets to be on that, like legally with you? These are things that some groups like don't have to think about at all. And some groups are like, I don't know how to get the people who I want to be on that list to get on that list.
Yeah, I mean, and when you ask that question about, what do I look forward in the work? One is, groups often come to me because they have some sort of pain point on, how do we work with each other? How do we work with our communities? How do we work with our customers? And sometimes it's from a place of, hey, we're doing pretty good and we want to build on that, right? And other times there's a place, they're coming from places like there's deep polarization. And that polarization, like, so you can think of something that you are polarized about. And we all have something. Think of your values and then think of people who are violating it. We're recording this after the election, so people probably have pretty easy access to something they're polarized on right now.
Yeah.
That is such a place of deep suffering. There's fear, there's stress in the body, survival is at stake. Likely we tighten, maybe our heart races. I mean, you can just check in with your body on how you feel when you're polarized. When we can move to a place where I might still disagree, I might need to have really strong boundaries, but I can at least recognize them as a fellow human being.
Yeah.
There's so much more space around that. We're so much less likely to be overwhelmed. We're more likely to be able to dream of and create strategies that bring people along with us. Because if we get into a cycle of, if you don't already agree with me, then you're a terrible person, like, we're going to just stay in that cycle forever.
Right. Yeah. If you're not willing to open up to just seeing, like, it's like we're all trying to just like exist and survive and get through.
Right. And so, again, it's tough because for some of these, like, there's not a lot of common ground.
Yeah.
And we often assume the least possible common ground is possible. So we don't always know. And sometimes the common ground we have to start with is, this is a fellow human being like me. Like, this is somebody who wakes up in the morning. This is somebody who wants to have fulfilling relationships. This is somebody who wants to be happy. I might disagree with all the ways of going about, doing that in life.
Creating that. Yeah.
But if I can say, hey, this person is doing the best they can with what they know, that can take really the temperature down. Because if I imagine everybody who voted a certain way is really out to get my community, that is overwhelming. That makes it really hard for me to move around in the world. And I don't even think it's accurate. I think there's a small group of people who are,
get more access and more visibility.
Right. And a lot of people are, this is not, I mean, polling keeps on showing this is not a top issue for most people.
Mm-hmm.
Polling shows that, if you hear enough advertising about how, my community or another community is terrible, like, you're going to be swayed by that.
Mm-hmm.
But I can make more room for someone who's swayed by what they've heard.
Mm-hmm.
And might be open to changing once there's more information or, other things in their life improve. Like, that is much easier for me to hold and be able to function in the world.
Right.
It's not ideal.
Yeah. Yeah.
But
no, I think that's a great point, right? It's just that, again, bring it back down to the simple things of, like, the way you're trying to exist, someone else is too. And, not everyone is like, our brains obviously want to group together the stereotypes because it's just easier for our brains to then function.
Right. And it's this negativity bias. Like, if you miss a carrot in the wild, no big deal. You'll live to see another carrot. If you miss the saber-toothed tiger, you're not passing your genes down.
Yeah.
So anything with stripes.
No, absolutely.
Right?
But, I think through this whole conversation, it's like, if there's one way to get people to see that other communities are hurting the same way you are, or are feeling the same, that we can be happy for another community, doesn't mean that it takes happiness away from us. It's not a threat. If someone else is being successful, right? All of those things that are instilled through fear, and then the freeze and all that happens, is that to do exactly what you just said, is take it back down to, what's the point of this?
Right.
What's the goal? What's the responsibility in this? And
who benefits from us fighting with each other?
From all this?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Kai, thank you so much for this awesome conversation. I know we could keep going forever, but I appreciate your perspective. I think that the work that you're doing is phenomenal. And just, again, Kai Speaks, like, you just dropped so many incredible perspectives on the way that we're thinking about how to. So I hope that everyone who's listening in today, like, really takes that and goes back and says, like, okay, whoever that person is that I am just, like, committed to hating or committed to demonizing or othering or whatever it is, like, what can I do to just be a little bit kinder? What can I do to just be a little bit more understanding of, they've got a family, they've got a community, they've got friends, like, they're just trying to live, exist. So
Yeah.
How can I just try to understand them?
Yeah. And you might need some real strong boundaries around along that too, right? But yeah, just more space for understanding each other as human beings. That would go such a long way.
Yeah.
And it's
Well,
something,
yeah.
yeah, and it's something that we have to practice. It doesn't always come naturally.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Kai, so much for being here. And, I know everyone's going to want to connect with you on LinkedIn and everywhere. And we're going to have all of that information in the resources below. But once again, thank you, because I think this is such an important topic. And especially right now, it could not be more timely
Right,
to really help understand each other.
right, right. Well, thank you so much.
I really hope that you enjoy this episode, and I just have one favor to ask you. If you could just make sure to hit that subscribe button, leave a rating and review, it's going to help us tremendously to make sure that we reach as many people as possible that you think should be listening to our episodes. I'll see you next week for another episode, and thank you so much for leaving that one review, that one subscription, and sharing this with your friends.